Hello and welcome once again to Worldview on Dialogus. I am Vishal Dahiya, and today we're going to talk about an issue which is not only the talk of the town but talk of the entire world. That is Trump tariffs once again. Now, President Trump has announced sweeping tariffs against India and several other nations as well. We are specifically going to talk about India and of course its neighbors because as far as India is concerned, the tariff structure says that it will be 25% in addition to what earlier it was, which was an average around 2.5%. So essentially it should be somewhere around 27% which will come into force. Now, the reason why it is a cause of concern for both the countries and not only for India, for United States also specifically, that both sides have been trying for a long time now to further enhance their trade relationship, their economic relationship, that is increase the amount of exports from both sides. There is a huge amount of trade deficit when we talk about India and United States. While India does export a significant amount of material as far as electronics, pharmaceuticals and various other products as well. In terms of US imports, the figure is not that high, something which has been raised time and again by both President Trump and his administration as well. But right now, where are we stuck as far as the deal which was being threshed out between India and the United States is concerned? Also, the geopolitical implications, because President Trump had also said that those countries who deal with Russia, specifically in Russian oil or Russian energy, they will face further tariff structures apart from what has already been announced. So how will that impact Indian economy? How will that impact the relationship between India and United States? And what has been the Trump administration's stand vis-a-vis India's neighbors, be it Pakistan or Bangladesh or other competing countries like Vietnam and Thailand and other such nations also, and China specifically. So for more on this, we are joined by two distinguished experts today. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with former Ambassador Gurjit Singh is joining us, a very well-known voice as far as diplomacy and geopolitics is concerned, and now we're talking about trade and economy in terms of geopolitics. Again, Ambassador Gurjit, welcome to the show. We would like to understand from you as we move forward various aspects and various implications. We are also joined by Professor Vipin here with us in the studio from IIM Kozhikode. He is an economist there, teaches economy, keeps a very close tab on economic and trade aspects. Professor Vipin, welcome to the studio and to the show here. I'll begin with you, Ambassador Gurjit, and let's first start by lay the ground and understand why is this happening in terms of reciprocal tariffs which are being announced by President Trump? Why this to and fro movement, and now we are resting at 25%, and then we'll come to the implication part. Let's first try and understand why.
For having me, let me say the three things. First, I think from the time that Trump assumed office again, and there was a sense of euphoria in India that our old relationship with him would lead to more positive engagement, which also led to the first Quad foreign ministers meeting and then the very successful visit of Prime Minister Modi to Washington, led us to believe that we were entering a new positive phase of Indo-US relations. I think there is the acronym COMPACT, which describes that relationship. But what we have seen over 6 months is that the worldview of President Trump is heavily trade-centered and is affecting all countries, particularly those of them who are their close partners. And this includes India, Japan, Australia, Mexico, Canada, everybody. So everybody is now trying to deal with the United States in the best way possible with little coordination among each other. And the third part is, this is geopolitically pressurized. We expected Trump to be a more energetic part of the Quad to check China in the Indo-Pacific. The Trump administration has been reaching out to China and trying to make their own deal, putting other Quad partners in a quandary vis-a-vis China. And now, while taking up while hiking up these penalties or tariffs on us by 25%, it is because he says India has not led to a trade deal. India is a member of BRICS. India buys weapons from Russia. India buys energy from Russia. And on top of that, then he is cozying up to China and even closer to Pakistan. Now, are these purely negotiating tactics or pressure tactics? Because many of these things are not new. India has been a member of BRICS since 2009 or even earlier, 6. So, what is new? So, there is an element of mercantilism and transactionalism in the Trump administration, which is entirely focusing for some reason on tariffs, which is neither good for their relationships nor for their own economy.
Okay, fair enough. As we understand, that it looks like there's a pressure tactic which is being played by the Trump administration, and they're pulling the trade card, the mercantile card, which, as Ambassador Gurjit is pointing out, is not going to be very healthy in the long run for their relationship with various friendly countries, and India is, of course, one of them. Now, Professor Vipin, let's understand the economic aspect of it, purely economic aspect of it and the implications. While some experts say that it might only have an impact of around 0.2% on the India's GDP. Some estimates take it to around 0.5%. Now, those are figures, but when we look at the trade figures, there is a huge deficit gap between what India exports to United States and what India imports from United States. That seemingly is one of the reasons why President Trump and Trump administration and United States has been pushing for quite some time now that this imbalance has to be taken care of. But do you think this is the right way to move forward? That's one. And two, there are negotiations already going on. So what was the hurry of moving ahead with 25% tariff structure?
Yeah, so lots packed into your questions, right? First of all, from an economic point of view, there's nothing wrong, nothing bad about trade deficits. There's nothing good about trade surpluses. I think the issue arises from the fact that President Trump is not a seasoned politician. He's basically a seasoned businessman. So he starts looking at the United States not as a country, but as a firm. Right, and countries are very different from firms, right? So let me give you a simple example, right? So if I take produce from India to the United States worth $100,000, sell it at a handsome profit, and I buy bottles of wine from the United States, come and sell it in India and make a handsome profit. Now in my company profit and loss account, it's a profit for me. Right? It's a profit for the customers in the United States. It's a profit for customers in India. But if you look at balance of payments, it's negative because I took goods worth 100,000 out, and I brought goods worth 200,000 in. Has have the people in India suffered? No. So the balance of payments, this idea of wanting balance of payment surplus or and so on is a false idea. It's a fallacious idea. And the first economist, not the first economist, one of the first economists to take on this idea was Adam Smith, all the way back 300 years ago. So the mercantilist fallacy has somehow clouded President Trump's thinking. That's not something that we can do much about. So that's, I think, just a fact that we've got to accept.
But the underlying question here, and you're making an interesting point. The underlying question here is, again, who suffers more?
Yeah.
Isn't it the US consumer, the US economy, which is going to suffer more in the long run? In the short run, they might have some fillip in their earnings as far as tariffs are concerned. But in the long run, won't they suffer because our exports are higher?
Well, short run seems to be very, very short in this case, because we already see cost of living in the US going up. Construction costs have gone up because steel import duties have gone up. So the suffering has already begun in the US economy. And international trade is a win-win situation, which means blocking of international trade is a lose-lose. So suffering has begun, all around the world. But yeah, that's yeah.
Okay, we'll look at the Indian part a little later, but let me come back to Mr. Gurjit here. Mr. Gurjit, you earlier mentioned BRICS, and interestingly, when we look at other BRICS countries, for example, Brazil or China as well. Russia, of course, is already in Trump's crosshairs, but Brazil and China also, the tariff structure is very, very high. So should we consider geopolitically Trump administration and President Trump himself is looking BRICS as an entity, as competitor number one as far as economics and trade is concerned, apart from, of course, security issues and national interests?
Well, just go back to what the professor was saying. I think we need to look at three figures besides the cost of construction and inflation. I think look at labor data in the United States. I think they are now trying to fudge it. It's because employment is falling. And I think that is very important to know that the US economy is not benefiting from tariffs. The government budget may benefit. The US economy as a whole is not benefiting. Look at the efforts they are making to control the Fed and the value of the dollar. So these are all artificial political mechanisms. Now coming back to BRICS. So among the original 4 and the South Africa 5 BRICS, I think we are the best off for the moment. Everybody else is worse off than us. But that is no solace. But I think if BRICS is being targeted for geopolitical reasons, then I think there's an error here in the thinking. Because India is the one BRICS country which is sticking to the original BRICS doctrine and not letting an anti-US or anti-dollar effort succeed. So to pillory us for being in BRICS, I think is missing the wood for the trees. But that seems to be common in US enunciation. Now I differentiate here between enunciations and policy. Tweets or truth social posts are threats. They are not policy. The policy will be made. So this announcement of 25% on India is an announcement. But a US trade delegation is coming this month to continue the trade negotiations. What will happen is that with this announcement, I think there is a backlash in India. So any flexibility that India would have shown on red lines like agriculture or dairy or things like that will not happen now. And if you see Prime Minister Modi's statement in Varanasi today, he has clearly again spoken of vocal for local, meaning don't buy from outside what is becoming too expensive. Let's stick to ourselves. Now, this means that we need to strengthen our own economy and not be dependent on exports to one of our largest economies, which is the United States. And that is the crucial question which is of impact to us. Because several of our sectors will suffer in this battle.
Okay, let me take this point to Professor Vipin here. As Ambassador Gurjit is pointing out, as far as as the point where we left our earlier conversation, that is, how does it impact India? Now, of course, India is not going to cross or let United States cross the red lines as far as agriculture sector and the dairy sector is concerned, food, tech also, because that is something which is not acceptable to us. But when we look at other sectors and when we look at other countries also, I'm looking at the numbers here. Bangladesh, the tariff structure says around 19%. For around 20% rather. For Pakistan, it is 19%. Now, economically speaking, it is irrelevant, but that is a part which is for Ambassador Gurjit later on. Vietnam, 20%, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Philippines, 19%. The reason why I'm pointing out these figures is because when we look at Bangladesh, it is going to affect our RMG sector, that is ready-made garment sector. As far as Vietnam and Malaysia, Philippines, all these countries are concerned, I think leather footwear sector is somewhere we might feel the pinch. How big the pinch can be, that's one question. And two, are the red lines which have already been drawn, there is no scope, we are not going back on that, right? As far as agriculture and food, dairy product sector is concerned.
I just want, I like the way you put it, and I just wanted to kind of draw a string from the comment made by Ambassador earlier. The red lines are exactly where we need to work. Right? This trade negotiation is halted because of very high tariffs. And here Trump is right. Lots of things that Trump does we don't need to take too serious. It's these business negotiations that I'll pay you $1,000, and then you say, oh, 1,000 is too little. He's a businessman. He's not a statesman. He's not Atal Bihari Vajpayee. We've got to understand the difference between Trump and a statesman, right? So lots of the gimmicks we've got to just keep on the side.
He's a tough negotiating tradesman.
Well, in a certain cultural
not
context,
a statesman, but tough negotiating tradesman.
In a certain cultural context.
Okay.
It looks very odd in other cultural contexts. He goes to Japan, and there is this ceremony about feeding fish. Obama goes and he feeds fish slowly. Trump just dumps food to fish and leaves, and this looks very odd. Many individuals would just not negotiate with you if you kind of violate their cultural norms. So he's successful in a particular cultural context.
And comes back from Qatar with a free plane.
But going back to the red lines, and our agriculture sector is quite uncompetitive. It produces goods at too high a cost. Question is why? Because the production technologies and production methods are too primitive. Question is why? Because we have regulations which prevent the emergence of efficient firms. Land parcels are too small. We don't have large-scale agriculture.
But the answer to this doesn't lie in letting United States cross those red lines. The answer lies in reformist policies here.
The answer lies in reforming Indian agriculture, and answer lies not necessarily only in Delhi but in the states. Far too often, far too much of the burden about changing this economy, getting it to grow, people look up to Delhi. But agriculture, like much else, most of the action points are with the states.
Okay.
Right? And Delhi, if you look all the way from Narasimha Rao to the present Modi government, Delhi keeps doing reforms and trying to arm twist the states. If you do these reforms, we'll pay you. As if, the states are doing us a favor by doing these reforms. So I think lots of the responsibility needs to be shifted there. We need to not have these red lines. We need to have a competitive agricultural sector where even without tariffs, we have no issues.
Okay, we'll come to the international part a little later. But Ambassador Gurjit, your views on that very interesting point Professor Vipin is making here. Let's first, put our house in order so that others are not able to, have hawk's eyes on our agri sector, on our dairy sector.
No, because it is not the question of first. The question is we should have done it long ago. Please
Yes.
remember that when we were in the WTO, we were always trying to protect our agriculture there. So it's not a Trump issue. We have always tried to protect our agriculture because of the idea that we are protecting agricultural jobs. Nobody knows how many they are. But alongside, our industry is not competitive either. As a result, we get annoyed with ASEAN. We get even to the Africans, we say not more than this because agricultural things we can't compete. So we are essentially a non-competitive economy spoilt by its own market.
Okay.
So, there's an article by Amitabh Kant, I think yesterday, which says it's time for Big Bang reform. It was time for Big Bang reforms 20 years ago. But over a period of time, we have only had small reforms. So I agree with Professor, reforms are required. But I don't think you can do it in the trade negotiating window that the American administration has put for you. But yes, we must look within and reform, become competitive, and then you will be more in demand for regional supply chains, which will allow greater South-South cooperation with ASEAN, with Africa, and with others. So basically, we also have to diversify away from a dependence on the US market.
Okay.
UK was a good idea, but it's not the market.
Also, there is a difference, Ambassador Gurjit, from a diplomatic point of view also and from a geopolitical angle also. There is a difference between the way Japan or European Union may have negotiated with United States than the way we will negotiate with United States because they're dependent on US for security guarantees. We're not.
Well, you see, I think you gave the example of Qatar. So I think the Qatar template is what the EU, Korea and Japan have picked up. Buy yourself out of trouble. So Qatar gifted the plane, but EU, Japan, Korea promising billions of dollars of investment in the United States to raise the American economy's value. How that will come, we don't know. That is not an alternative for us.
Yes.
We are invested in the United States. But if you take this argument further, then there is another error in the American way of calculating things. Why are they looking only at tariff on manufactured goods? On services, the gap is not so big. India buys almost as many services as it exports. I think the gap is about 4 billion Yes, you're right. Secondly, on education, it's almost $20 billion a year that India contributes to the US economy. On tourism, on buying defense equipment, on buying airplanes. These are not calculated in these tariffs. So we should simply stop buying Boeings and use it as a leverage with Europe for the FTA, that we'll place order for 500 Airbuses if you do the FTA with us. I mean, now you have to change your tack on FTA. We should not depend only on tariffs on manufactured goods. Let's look back. In Trump 1.0, if I'm not wrong, they withdrew the GSP worth $5.6 billion on our traditional exports. We did not speak, we lived with it. Even now, out of all our exports of about, I think, how much is it, $80 billion or something? So $25 billion is exempt from a tariff increase, including pharmaceuticals. So we are not crying in every spiel. I think we are crying in certain sectors, and there is where the problem lies. That it will have a background impact into the Indian economy, which at this critical moment. The other issue is, calling India a dead economy. That again shows the lack of realism.
Yeah, I was coming to that only. Yes.
The World Bank and the IMF are saying India will grow between 6 and 7%, and you believe that India is a dead economy because we buy oil from the Russians. These are not clear ideas. I think these are just pressure points to pinprick us.
So it's just a trade negotiation tactic which is happening there. But Mr. Gurjit, looking at other international aspect, and as I was earlier, asking Professor Vipin also, but before I seek his response, since we are having this thread of conversation, what is your viewpoint vis-a-vis Trump's stand or Trump administration stand on India's neighbors? For example, Bangladesh 20%, Vietnam, Malaysia, Philippines around 19%, Pakistan 19%. I don't know what kind of economic sense it makes there for the United States, but how does it impact India?
Strategic sense, I would have preferred that the Americans, as part of a strategic partnership that we have, concede South Asia to India and look at South Asia through our prism. Of course, that would always exclude Pakistan. But in the case of Bangladesh, they already showed that they were working contrary to our preferences. Now comes Pakistan. We are all wondering why Pakistan is the new favorite. Even on Op Sindoor, Pakistan keeps giving credit to President Trump that he's the one who's stalled the war. They nominate him for the prize. So they are using the, how am I to call it? The buttering up technique to full advantage, and it seems to work with them. So the 19% that Pakistan has got, it is not a concession. It is still a huge increase on Pakistani exports, but I think it's partly a reward for geostrategic congruence vis-a-vis Iran. That they are being rewarded.
Okay. One last question before I let you go, Mr. Gurjit, because I know you're running short of time. Is a very important one, because that is also being talked about time and again. We earlier spoke about BRICS. Is de-dollarization such a big threat for United States of America or the Trump administration? And is it moving that fast that this becomes a sort of a cornerstone for their global economic policy?
The Americans believe that the expanded BRICS, if they were to adopt de-dollarization, it would impact the United States economy. Because this includes the UAE, Saudi Arabia, India, who are their big partners, and now several of the ASEAN countries. So I think the Americans want to nip it in the bud more as a strategic pinch rather than an economic sense. India has already made it clear that de-dollarization is not on the BRICS agenda. And as I said earlier, India is keeping that path, and therefore we should be respected rather than repudiated. Secondly, I think we are also looking at more local currency trades within the BRICS, and that perhaps to America looks like de-dollarized trade because yuan is increasingly being used with China ASEAN trade, China UAE trade, and things like that. So I think since China is now a bigger economic player, if they use their own currency for trading, it does amount in some ways to a move away from the dollar.
You know, as Ambassador Gurjit was pointing out, in terms of de-dollarization, let's take that question first. Is it easier said than done, and is it a concept which is just being talked about, threshed about, because so many countries, so many economies need to come together and then move ahead as far as de-dollarization is concerned?
You know, first of all, trade, right, happens over time. There's you know, even you know, I promise to give you something, right, and I give this, we agree on a price, and then you pay me the price, I deliver the good this time. And one of the most fundamental, one of the most important things for trade to go through is, you know, having a stable currency, right? So if we agree on a price, that price must mean the same thing in terms of real goods and services we can purchase a month from now or a year from now, and the trade would actually be executed. In some senses, dollar has you know, provided that stability, which is why lots of trade happens in dollar vis-a-vis, for instance, currency of Zimbabwe or whatever else, which is unreliable, right? So for dollar to be replaced with another currency, you would need a currency which is as reliable. It's not very clear to me that you know, yuan necessarily provides that reliability. The Indian rupee certainly does not. Euro potentially could, but it's not very clear that euro would. So that shift is not going to be terribly quick, and the shift does not happen solely because a group of countries have decided that we're going to do this, because trade ultimately is executed and decided by lots of firms, many individuals, you know, who are trying to do the best thing in their interest.
Okay, so ultimately, this is also just one of the pressure points, you know, being applied by the Trump administration or United States of America, and it has been happening for quite some time now. They're just trying to, as Mr. Gurjit was saying, trying to nip it in the bud, even the idea itself. Now, coming back to the question which I asked you earlier, vis-a-vis India's neighbors, how does it impact us? Because when we look at Bangladesh, the RMG, as I was saying, ready-made garments, the other countries like Vietnam, Malaysia, Philippines, leather footwear and all that, is the pinch going to be a little harder on us, or we can sustain that?
Now, the tariff differences, there are tariff differences, but they're marginal and small, particularly compared to productivity differences, particularly compared to wage differences, which is what drives companies often to situate themselves in one country to another, compared to, for instance, differences in how long it takes to get goods out of ports, right? Compared to these sort of wide variety, compared to differences in how much does it cost to produce good, how much does it cost to ship goods out, the tariff differences are potentially relatively smaller, right? So it's not very clear. It's going to have a major, it's going to create major economic havoc. I think some of the core issues involved have to do with China and Russia, and you know, the ambassador, when he said, you know, the US somehow, you know, negotiating unilaterally with China, leaving the other Quad members. I was in Russia for 10 days last month at a Bank of Russia conference, and you know, one of the reasons why the Russian economy has been able to sustain the Western tariffs has been their increased integration with the Chinese economy. And India is in a peculiar situation because, at least with the Trump administration, Washington seems to deal with New Delhi as it deals with anyone else, right? There are no special favors, there is no special love or whatever else, right? On the other hand, to Moscow, it's not very clear that New Delhi has a lot to offer to Moscow other than buying oil and gas. Beijing, on the other hand, has a fair bit to offer to Moscow, partly because of their deep, an economy which is has deep supply chains. They're indeed capable of manufacturing goods we're just not. For instance, you know, the Russians at some point gave and had a large mining project of some sort, oil rig project of some sort, I forget the exact kind, and they paid money to German companies to supply equipment. Once the sanctions came in, the German company did not supply the equipment, nor did they give the money advance back. And guess who supplied them with equipment? The Chinese did. Of course, the Russians paid for it, but they've got increasingly integrated with the Chinese economy. Their manufacturing has not suffered as much because the Chinese economy has been able to provide inputs. Not only has New Delhi shown sort of less desire to step in, partly because of the fear of Western sanctions, but quite honestly, even if India wanted to, India just doesn't have that kind of a manufacturing base. You know, our sort of much touted light aircraft, its engine comes from General Electrics. We do not have the capacity to manufacture jet engines in this country, whereas Beijing does. Right? So I think there's, and the ambassador was speaking about this. There is a sort of immediate need to vastly reform this economy.
Okay, so the takeaways are that one, we need to push ourselves harder in terms of further expanding our manufacturing base, bringing in reformist policies not only to the manufacturing sector but to our pain points or our sensitive points, for example agriculture or food tech or dairy products as well. And as you are pointing out, that we need to recalibrate our approach perhaps when we are talking about our position vis-a-vis the global situation, be it Russia, China or United States.
Imagine the peculiar scenario that in the next skirmish with Pakistan or whoever else, the Americans are distant and Moscow doesn't say much because it has close proximity with Beijing, and Beijing basically asks Moscow to just take it easy, and Moscow might have to.
Because they have their economic interests.
So you are in a New Delhi finds itself in a very peculiar geopolitical situation at the moment, and the only way out is we've got to have more to give rest of the world, right? And what to give? We've got to have a vibrant economy which can produce complex manufactured goods, complex services, and so on and so forth.
And equally recalibrate our, geopolitical and diplomatic approach there as well. Thank you so much, Professor Vipin, for joining us. So there it is. You heard Professor Vipin, economics from IIM Kozhikode, and Ambassador Gurjit as well on this very interesting aspect of the Trump tariffs everybody is talking about, but we took a deep dive to try and understand as to what lies at the heart of President Trump's, swinging matches, or rather googlies or yorkers, which he keeps on throwing at various countries, including India this time around, over 25% tariff. What are the, underlying reasons or underlying aspects there? What does India stands to lose or gain from this situation, and what we should do in the near future and in the long term as well. So keep watching Worldview on Dialogus for more such invigorating conversations and analysis as well, and stay tuned. Thank you.